his eyes scanning the road ahead, lit only by the soft glow of his headlights. It was late, far later than he usually worked, but the allure of overtime had been too tempting to pass up. The delivery app buzzed faintly from the phone mounted on his dashboard, guiding him to yet another secluded address. The town had grown quieter as the hours dragged on, its streets increasingly desolate as people retreated into their homes. Streetlights flickered sporadically, casting long, wavering shadows that seemed to move of their own accord. Derek turned onto a narrow road lined with trees, their gnarled branches forming a canopy that blocked out what little moonlight seeped through the overcast sky. The GPS beeped, indicating that he was close to his destination. The address was unfamiliar, though most were. Part of the job was navigating places he'd never been, dropping off packages for people he would never meet. But there was something about this particular route that unsettled him. It wasn't just the isolation or the darkness. It was the way the air felt heavier, as though the forest lining the road held its breath. The trees stood unnaturally still, their silhouettes looming like silent sentinels. He slowed as the app directed him down an unmarked gravel path, the tires crunching against loose stones. The house came into view suddenly, its outline sharp against the dark sky. It was an old structure, its roof steeply pitched and windows darkened. The porch light was on, a weak yellow glow that seemed almost swallowed by the surrounding gloom. Derek frowned. He hadn't realized the house would be this remote, and for a moment, he considered canceling the delivery. But the thought of the extra money pushed him forward. Pulling up to the edge of the driveway, he shifted the van into park and reached for the package. A small, unremarkable box, its label marked only with the address and the word urgent stamped in bold letters. He hesitated, his fingers brushing the edges of the box as a chill ran down his spine. It was probably nothing, just a mix of fatigue and the eerie setting. Still, he found himself glancing around as though expecting to see someone or something watching from the shadows. The porch creaked under his weight as he climbed the steps, the sound unnaturally loud in the stillness. He placed the package carefully near the door, snapping a quick photo for proof of delivery. The app instructed him to knock, and he did so, the sound echoing faintly before being swallowed by the silence. He waited a moment, the seconds stretching uncomfortably long. No one came to the door. He knocked again, harder this time, and listened intently. The house remained quiet, its windows like dark, unblinking eyes staring back at him. He was about to turn and leave when he thought he heard something. A faint sound, like a whisper, or the rustling of fabric. He froze, his ears straining to catch it again, but there was nothing. The hairs on the back of his neck stood on end, and for the first time, he felt truly uneasy. It wasn't just the house or the isolation. It was the sense that he wasn't alone, that something unseen was close, watching him. He turned quickly, his footsteps hurried as he made his way back to the van. The crunch of gravel beneath his boots seemed unnaturally loud, each step echoing in his ears. He climbed into the driver's seat, slamming the door shut and locking it instinctively. His breath came in shallow gasps, his hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. He glanced at the rearview mirror, half expecting to see someone, or something, standing in the driveway. But there was nothing, just the dim outline of the house receding into the darkness as he backed out. The GPS directed him back to the main road, the glowing line on the screen his only guide through the maze of unlit paths. As he drove, the sense of unease persisted, an invisible weight pressing down on him. He tried to shake it off, blaming it on his overactive imagination and the unsettling atmosphere. But when he reached for his phone to confirm the delivery, he noticed app had marked the package as undelivered. Confused, he double-checked the photo he'd taken, a clear shot of the box on the porch. It didn't make sense. He refreshed the app, thinking it might be a glitch, but the status remained unchanged. And then, as he stared at the screen, a notification popped up. "Delivery incomplete. Please return to the address." His stomach tightened, a knot of dread forming as he read the message. He didn't want to go back, didn't want to set foot on that property again. But the app wouldn't let him continue without resolving the issue. With a sinking feeling, he realized he had no choice. He turned the van around, the headlights cutting through the thick darkness as he retraced his path. As the house came into view once more, Derek's heart pounded in his chest. The porch light was still on, its dim glow barely illuminating the front steps. But something was different. The package was gone. The package was gone. Derek sat frozen in the driver's seat, gripping the wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. He blinked, hoping his eyes were playing tricks on him, but the porch was unmistakably empty. The space where he had left the box now held only a dark, shadowy void, illuminated weakly by the dying glow of the porch light. He swallowed hard, his throat dry, and glanced at the app on his phone. The status hadn't changed. "Delivery incomplete. Please return to the address." A cold bead of sweat trickled down his temple as his mind raced for answers. Had someone come out after he left and taken the package? But why would the app still mark it as undelivered? For a moment, he considered driving away, abandoning the delivery and chalking it up as a loss. But he knew the company would demand an explanation. Worse, they might dock his pay or suspend him. With a deep, shaky breath, he forced himself to open the door. The air outside was colder than before, biting through his jacket as he stepped out into the night. The gravel crunched beneath his boots as he approached the house again, his eyes darting nervously to the windows. The glass panes stared back at him, dark and lifeless. He climbed the steps slowly, each creak of the wooden boards sending a jolt of tension through his body. When he reached the top, he hesitated, staring at the empty spot where the package had been. "Hello," he called, his voice barely more than a whisper. The word hung in the air, unanswered, before being swallowed by the oppressive silence. He leaned down, inspecting the porch. There were no marks, no scuff or scrape to suggest the box had been dragged away. It was as if it had simply vanished. A faint unease prickled at the edges of his mind, and for the first time, he noticed how still everything was. The wind had died completely, the trees no longer rustling. Even the faint hum of distant traffic had disappeared, leaving a suffocating quiet that made his ears ring. Then, from deep within the house, he heard it. A soft, almost imperceptible sound. A knock, rhythmic and deliberate, echoing faintly as though coming from somewhere far away. Derek froze, every instinct screaming at him to leave. But his feet wouldn't move, rooted to the spot as the knocking continued, growing louder and more insistent. "Is someone there?" he called, his voice cracking. The question felt absurd the moment it left his mouth, but the sound was so human, so deliberate, that he couldn't ignore it. His eyes flicked to the door, its surface worn and peeling. He noticed for the first time that the doorknob was slightly ajar, the gap just wide enough to reveal a sliver of darkness within. He stepped back, his breathing shallow. The knocking stopped. For a moment, there was nothing but silence, heavy and oppressive. Then a shadow moved behind the door. It was subtle, barely more than a flicker of motion, but enough to send a surge of panic through Derek. He stumbled backward, nearly tripping over his own feet. The door creaked open, just an inch, revealing a slice of blackness that seemed to swallow the faint light spilling from the porch. Derek's heart pounded in his chest as he stared, waiting, half expecting something to emerge. But nothing came. The darkness beyond the door remained still, a void that seemed to stretch endlessly. He turned to leave, every instinct screaming at him to get back to the van. But as he stepped off the porch, he heard it again, a whisper, faint and chilling, coming from behind him. It wasn't words, not exactly, but a low guttural sound that made the hairs on the back of his neck stand on end. Derek turned, his hands trembling. The door was fully open now, swinging gently on its hinges, though no breeze stirred the air. The darkness beyond seemed to ripple, as if alive, and within it, he thought he saw shapes. Vague, indistinct figures moving just out of reach. "Who's there?" he demanded, his voice trembling. The whispering grew louder, overlapping voices rising and falling in a dissonant murmur. It sounded like a language he couldn't understand, ancient and alien, and it filled his ears until he thought he might scream. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, the sound stopped. The air was silent once more, but the oppressive weight of the moment lingered, pressing down on him. Derek took a shaky step back, his legs threatening to give out beneath him. From the darkness, a figure emerged. It was tall and thin, its shape barely human, with limbs that seemed to stretch unnaturally long. Its face was obscured, shrouded in shadows that clung to it like smoke. Derek couldn't move, couldn't breathe, as the thing stepped onto the porch, its head tilting as if studying him. The box was in its hand.